Please just feed my child, begged the desperate mom. The cowboy's choice changed everything. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the dusty settlement of New Eden. Wind swept across the barren plains beyond the colony, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and metal. Small, scattered buildings leaned at odd angles, their walls patched with metal sheets scavenged from old ships. Life here had always been hard, but the recent solar storm had made survival nearly impossible. Automated food dispensers, the lifeline of the settlement, had failed, leaving the people scrambling for scraps. Mara clutched her child tightly against her chest, her arms trembling. The baby's wails pierced the quiet evening, a cry that carried through the empty streets. The child was thin, too thin, its small chest rising and falling with shallow, desperate breaths. Mara's eyes, red from crying, scanned the horizon as she searched for someone, anyone who could help. She saw him then, a lone figure riding a worn hoverbike across the dusty plain, a wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world, but Mara knew better. Time had already run out for her child. "Please," she called, her voice hoarse, "please just feed my child." The man paused. He was tall and lean, with weathered skin that spoke of years under harsh suns and colder nights. His hat tilted low, but the flicker of his eyes revealed a hint of curiosity. He didn't immediately respond, and Mara's heart sank. "Sir, I have nothing left," she begged, holding the baby closer. "The dispensers, they're broken. I have no food. Please, my child is starving." He dismounted slowly, his boots stirring dust into the air. His movements were calm, precise, like someone who had faced danger before and had learned to remain steady. He didn't speak immediately, only studied the small family in front of him. "Name S. Jace," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "I'm not from here." Mara's desperation deepened. "Please, I don't care where you're from, please just help him, just for a little food." Jace glanced at the child. Thin arms, big round eyes that were wet and pleading, lips cracked from dryness. He had seen suffering before, but this was raw and undeniable. Humans were fragile yet stubbornly resilient, he thought. And here, in this small settlement on the edge of the frontier, life had become a test of endurance. "I don't have much," he said cautiously. "I'm passing through. The nearest supply depot is miles away, dangerous miles." Mara nodded almost frantically. "I'll do anything, anything, just please my child." Her voice broke and tears rolled down her cheeks. Jace hesitated. He had a reputation in the colonies, a loner, a drifter, a man who solved problems in ways others didn't understand. But he had also learned the hard truth. Sometimes a choice to help could make the difference between life and death. And sometimes it defined who you were. "You can't carry him far in this heat," Jace said finally. "It's 100 kilometers to the depot. You'd never make it." I can't leave him," Mara whispered, her fingers clutching his arm. "He's all I have. Please just help me." The wind picked up, sending loose papers and debris dancing across the empty streets. Somewhere, a stray dog barked in the distance. Jace looked down at the child again. The baby reached out a tiny hand, and Jace felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years. Compassion, perhaps, or maybe just the undeniable pull of life that demanded protection. "All right," he said finally. "I'll help, but you'll need to come with me. I don't go back alone, and it's too dangerous for just one of us." Mara blinked, disbelief and relief warring across her face. "Really? You'll take us?" "I said I'll help," Jace replied, though he kept his tone neutral. He didn't promise comfort, didn't promise safety, only survival. The three of them, Mara, her child, and Jace, set off toward the edge of the settlement. The hoverbike's engine hummed softly as Jace lifted the child carefully, securing him in a makeshift harness. Mara held onto Jace's arm as they moved through the abandoned streets, dodging collapsed walls and debris from the storm. "This way," Jace said, guiding them toward the open plains. The depot isn't far if we keep moving. But we'll need to avoid the scavenger drones. They're aggressive, and the storm has knocked out the usual patrols. Could be dangerous. Mara swallowed hard. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. She had already stared into the face of despair and found it empty. All that mattered was the tiny life she carried against her chest. As they moved across the plains, Jace spoke quietly, mostly to himself. Humans always pushing forward no matter the odds. He glanced at Mara and the child. You know that better than most. Mara looked up at him, surprised. What do you mean? You're still moving, still fighting, even when it seems hopeless. That's why we survive, he said, a rare note of admiration in his voice. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Shadows stretched long and the temperature began to drop. Even in the chill, Mara felt a spark of hope. For the first time in days, she believed they might make it. Hours passed. The trio moved steadily, crossing ridges and shallow valleys. Mara's legs ached, but she pressed on. The child's small whimpers kept her heart racing, reminding her of the urgency of their journey. Every step was a test of endurance, every glance back a reminder of the stakes. Almost there, Jace said finally, pointing toward a glimmering structure in the distance. The depot's lights flickered through the twilight, a beacon of salvation in the endless plains. But as they approached, the hum of engines grew louder, too loud. Jace's eyes narrowed. We're not alone. From the shadows of a nearby ridge, silhouettes emerged, scrap metal drones, their sensors glowing red, scanning the terrain. They were scavenger drones, programmed to attack any living creature that crossed their territory. Mara froze, clutching her child tighter. Stay behind me, Jace whispered, moving forward with a confidence that belied the danger. He assessed the drones, calculating the risk, looking for weaknesses. Humans were unpredictable, creative, clever, and that unpredictability could be deadly. With careful, deliberate movements, he used the terrain to his advantage. He kicked loose rocks down the slope, creating noise and misdirection. The drones paused, sensors flickering as they recalibrated. Jace darted between cover, Mara close behind, the child held safely. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the edge of the depot. Jace signaled Mara to stay low as he assessed the defenses. The doors were heavy, locked electronically, but he grinned faintly. Nothing a little human ingenuity can't handle, he muttered. Mara didn't understand the details, and she didn't need to. She only saw that the impossible was becoming possible, and her heart swelled with relief. By the time the depot doors slid open, the stars were beginning to twinkle in the night sky. Inside, shelves of supplies stretched endlessly: food, water, warmth, hope. Mara clutched her child, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "Thank you." Jace said nothing, only nodded. He had done what humans did best: adapt, survive, and protect life when it mattered most. Outside, the wind carried the promise of tomorrow. Mara knew the journey wasn't over, but for now they had won a small victory, a moment of triumph in a galaxy that often seemed indifferent. And for the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope. Jace watched the plains beyond the depot, the child sleeping peacefully in Mara's arms. He understood more deeply than he had in years that even in a harsh universe, humans had a way of making a difference. One choice, one act of courage could change everything. The first light of dawn spilled across the plains of New Eden, painting the settlement in shades of soft gold. Mara sat beside the depot's low walls, her child sleeping in her arms. The small bundle of life was finally warm and fed, but the journey was far from over. The frontier was cruel and help was never permanent. Jace stood a few meters away, scanning the horizon. The hoverbike was ready, packed with supplies from the depot. He checked the fuel cells, making sure the vehicle could make the long trip back across the plains to safer territory. Every detail mattered. In the frontier, small mistakes cost lives. Mara approached him, her voice hesitant but firm. "We can't stay here forever." You'll have to take us with you. Jace glanced at her, then at the child. I told you before it's dangerous. Too many things out there that can kill in seconds. You sure you want to go? Yes, she said without hesitation. I can't leave my child behind. Please just take us. Anywhere you go is better than here. Jace studied her for a long moment. The settlement was quiet, almost eerily so. The solar storm had left its mark. Buildings were damaged, automated systems offline, and the usual hum of life was gone. Mara's determination reminded him of something long buried, why humans survived when so many others in the galaxy failed. Resilience, courage, resourcefulness, traits he'd rarely seen in anyone else. All right, he said finally, his voice calm but resolute. We leave now. He lifted the child carefully, securing him in the harness once more. Mara followed close, holding his arm as they approached the hoverbike. Jace mounted first, Mara behind him, and the child safely in the middle. The engine hummed to life, low and steady, and the three of them moved out across the plains. The morning air was crisp, and the plains stretched endlessly before them. Small rock formations dotted the horizon, and the occasional ruined building reminded them of the harshness of life in this colony. Mara couldn't help but glance at her child. The baby was asleep now, small chest rising and falling, oblivious to the danger that surrounded them. Her heart ached with relief mixed with fear. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly. Jace didn't answer immediately. He didn't want to frighten her, but he also didn't lie. "There's a safe zone," he said finally. "A colony with functioning food systems, medical care, people who can actually survive without starving, but it's far, days away by foot, hours by hoverbike if nothing goes wrong." Mara nodded, understanding the gravity of their situation. "Then let's get there." The first part of their journey was peaceful. The plains were wide and empty, the wind carrying soft whispers across the dusty terrain. Mara watched Jace closely, noting how careful he was, how he seemed to anticipate danger before it arrived. Every movement was precise, calculated. Humans had a way of thinking that machines couldn't predict. She thought of the scavenger drones from the depot and shivered. Without Jace's skills, they wouldn't have survived. But the frontier had its own way of reminding travelers that peace was temporary. By midday, dark clouds began to gather overhead. The wind shifted, carrying the sharp smell of ozone, a sign that another storm was approaching. Mara tightened her grip on the child, worry flickering across her face. Jace noticed her concern. "We can handle this," he said firmly. "Just stay close and hold on." The storm hit suddenly, a wall of wind, dust, and debris that forced them to slow down. The hoverbike wobbled under the pressure, and Mara clutched Jace tightly, fear and adrenaline mingling. The child cried out, startled by the noise and the shaking vehicle. Jace adjusted his grip, keeping both Mara and the child secure. They took shelter behind a small rock formation, the hoverbike parked as best they could in the uneven terrain. The storm raged for hours, turning the plains into a chaotic blur of sand and wind. Mara shivered but refused to leave her child's side. She watched Jace calmly inspect the hoverbike, making minor adjustments that kept them safe. Even in danger, he remained composed. "This is insane," Mara shouted over the wind. "How do you stay so calm?" Jace looked at her with a small grin. "Experience. And humans were stubborn. We survive because we refuse to panic. Machines can fail, storms can come, but humans, we adapt." Mara considered his words, realizing the truth in them. She had survived so far because she hadn't given up, because she kept moving forward no matter how hopeless it seemed. And Jace, he wasn't just surviving, he was protecting them. When the storm finally passed, the plains looked different. Tracks in the sand were washed away, landmarks hidden beneath dust and debris. Mara's heart sank a little. "How will we know the way?" Jace scanned the horizon. "We follow the sun for now." The depot had a backup map. "The colony we're headed to, it's near the edge of the eastern plains. We'll get there." As they traveled, they encountered signs of life, or at least what was left of it, abandoned vehicles, half buried under sand. The skeletons of animals, victims of the solar storm or the harsh desert. Mara's stomach tightened at the sight of death, but Jace didn't flinch. He saw it as data, survival information. Humans could adapt to death, learn from it, and keep going. By late afternoon, they reached a shallow canyon. The sun was low now, casting shadows that stretched across the rocky terrain. Jace slowed the hoverbike, scanning carefully. He could hear movement ahead, the scuffing of feet, soft clicks that didn't belong to animals. "Drones," he muttered. Mara's eyes widened. "Again?" Jace nodded. "We need to be careful, but we can get through this." The canyon was narrow, rocky walls on either side. It was perfect cover but dangerous if the drones spotted them. Jace used every trick he knew, diving behind boulders, timing their movements, throwing small rocks to distract the drone's sensors. Mara followed his lead, heart pounding, clutching her child. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. The drones were relentless, their sensors scanning for any sign of life. But humans, Jace knew, had a unique ability to improvise. They moved in ways that machines could not predict, and that unpredictability saved them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the canyon. The drones lost track of them and the plains opened up again. Mara gasped, relief flooding her. "We made it," she whispered. Jace didn't respond immediately. He kept scanning, alert as ever. "Not safe yet," he said. "We still have a long way to go, but we're closer." The sun set behind distant hills, painting the sky in deep orange and purple. Mara watched the stars begin to twinkle, a reminder that even in the harsh frontier, beauty existed. She hugged her child tightly, feeling warmth and hope she hadn't felt in days. That night, they camped near a small outcrop, the hoverbike secured and supplies rationed. Mara prepared a simple meal from the depot supplies, feeding her child carefully. Jace sat nearby, watching the horizon, silent but vigilant. "You're amazing," Mara said quietly, breaking the silence. "You saved us." Jace shrugged. "I did what any human would. We survive. We protect life. That's what makes us different." Mara nodded slowly, understanding. She had seen it herself. Human courage, ingenuity, and determination. In a galaxy that often seemed cold and indifferent, humans had a spark that couldn't be extinguished. The night was quiet, except for the soft breathing of the child and the distant howl of wind across the plains. Mara felt safe for the first time in days, knowing that with Jace's help, they might just survive. But the journey ahead was still long, and the frontier had many more trials in store. As she drifted into a light sleep, Mara thought about the future. She didn't know what challenges awaited them, but she knew one thing: humans never gave up. And with Jace by her side, perhaps survival wasn't just hope, it was certainty. The dawn broke slowly over the eastern plains, a pale light stretching across the horizon. Mara stirred beside the small fire they had built the night before, her child sleeping soundly in her arms. She felt a flicker of hope. Their journey had so far been treacherous, but they had survived. And survival in the frontier was never guaranteed. Jace was already awake, standing near the hoverbike. He adjusted the harness and checked the fuel cells once more, his movements methodical and precise. There was a rhythm to his work, a quiet confidence that came from years of surviving in harsh conditions. Mara watched him, amazed. Humans, she realized, had a way of facing danger and finding solutions that machines or aliens could never anticipate. "We need to keep moving," Jace said finally, his voice low but firm. "The safe colony is still far and the plains won't wait for us. They'll throw every challenge they can." Mara nodded, wrapping her shawl tighter around herself. She glanced down at her child and whispered softly, "Don't worry, little one. We're going to make it." The first part of the day was uneventful, but the plains were deceptive. Jace guided them carefully, scanning the terrain for any signs of danger. He knew that survival wasn't just about moving forward. It was about anticipating what could go wrong and adapting faster than the threat could strike. As they crossed a shallow valley, Mara noticed something unusual. A thin, black mist hovered near the ground, curling between rocks and crevices. "What is that?" she asked nervously. Jace slowed the hoverbike. "We've got to be careful, that's not natural. Could be a chemical leak from one of the abandoned colonies. Could be dangerous to breathe." Mara's stomach twisted with fear. "How do we get through it?" Jace glanced around. "We improvise. Humans have a way of doing that." He ripped a piece of cloth from his coat and handed it to Mara. "Cover your mouth and nose. Keep moving. Don't stop." She did as he instructed, the fabric pressed tightly against her face. The child was secured between them, protected from the worst of the mist. They moved cautiously, step by step, until the mist thinned and they were back on solid, safe ground. Mara let out a shaky breath, grateful for Jace's quick thinking. "You saved us," she said quietly. Again, Jace didn't respond, only gave a small nod. Saving lives was routine to him now, but to Mara it was nothing short of extraordinary. Humans, she realized, had a way of making the impossible seem routine. That was what made them special. By mid-morning they reached the edge of a canyon. The walls rose sharply on either side, jagged and unforgiving. A narrow path wound down into the canyon, barely wide enough for the hoverbike. Jace studied it carefully. "This is going to be tricky," he muttered. "The path is unstable. One wrong move and we could fall." Mara tightened her grip on the child. "We have to take it," Jace nodded. "We don't have a choice, but stay close. Follow my lead. Watch every step." The descent was slow and tense. Rocks crumbled beneath the hoverbike's wheels, forcing Jace to stop and adjust frequently. Mara's heart pounded with every wobble and slip. Yet, despite the danger, she felt a sense of awe. Watching Jace navigate the treacherous canyon, she realized that human ingenuity was more than just intelligence. It was courage, intuition, and the ability to think in moments when hesitation could mean death. Halfway down, a low rumble shook the canyon. Rocks tumbled from the walls above, threatening to crush them. Mara froze, but Jace reacted immediately. With careful maneuvering, he guided the hoverbike to a narrow ledge, using the canyon walls as cover. The child cried out briefly, startled, but Jace's calm voice reassured both mother and child. "Almost there," he said. "Keep calm. Humans survive by staying focused, even when fear is screaming." They finally reached the canyon floor, battered but safe. Mara looked up at the jagged cliffs above, shivering despite the warm sun. She had never imagined that survival could require such constant alertness. Yet, every trial made her more determined to keep moving. Her child's life depended on it. As they pressed onward, the terrain changed. The canyon opened into a rocky plateau with sharp cliffs and scattered vegetation. Jace stopped suddenly, listening. Mara followed his gaze and saw it too, a pack of wild creatures, alien to the human eye, prowling the plateau. Their eyes glowed faintly in the afternoon light and their movements were swift, predatory. "They're not just animals," Jace said softly. "They hunt in packs. We need to be clever. Keep moving slowly, use the rocks for cover." Mara's hands shook, but she trusted him. She pressed close, following his instructions. The creatures sniffed the air, moving closer, their eyes tracking them with unnatural precision. Jace scanned the plateau, looking for anything he could use to their advantage. "Move to the rocks on the left," he whispered. "They won't expect us to climb. Humans are unpredictable." Mara followed, and Jace led them carefully. Step by step, they climbed the rocks, keeping low and silent. The creatures prowled below, confused by their sudden disappearance. Mara's heart raced, but she felt a strange thrill. Humans survived because they adapted, because they could outthink creatures stronger and faster than themselves. By late afternoon, they had reached the edge of the plateau. Below, the plain stretched endlessly, leading toward the distant lights of the safe colony. Jace paused, scanning the terrain. "We're getting close," he said, "but there's one more challenge before we reach safety." Mara's stomach tightened. What now? Jace didn't answer immediately. He pointed toward a deep ravine cutting through the plains, too wide for the hoverbike to cross. A rickety old bridge built from metal scraps spanned the gap. The wind howled across it, threatening to topple anything that crossed. "We crossed the bridge," he said finally. "It's unstable, but it's the only way. Stay calm. Watch me first." Jace tested the bridge carefully, the metal groaning under his weight. Mara held her child tightly, fear gripping her heart. But she watched him, remembering every moment so far: the storm, the mist, the canyon, the creatures. Humans survived by staying focused, by adapting, by never giving up. Step by step, Jace moved across, adjusting the fragile metal, finding stable footholds. Mara followed, her heart in her throat. The child squirmed but remained secure, and Jace's steady guidance kept her from panicking. Halfway across, the bridge shuddered violently. Mara froze. The metal bent under their weight, threatening to collapse, but Jace remained calm. He adjusted their position, distributing weight carefully, using small handholds hidden along the bridge. "Almost there," he whispered. "Humans survive by staying calm, by thinking one step ahead. We've got this." Finally, they reached the other side. Mara collapsed onto solid ground, tears of relief streaming down her face. The child yawned and smiled, oblivious to the danger they had just faced. Mara hugged him tightly. Jace stood beside them, scanning the horizon. "We're not out of danger yet," he said. "The safe colony is still miles away and the plains are unpredictable, but this was the hardest part. You did well." Mara looked at him, awe and gratitude in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you. You saved us again." Jace shook his head. "No. Humans save each other every day. It's what we do. It's why we survive. You survived because you never gave up, because you kept moving forward. That's human ingenuity." The sun dipped low, painting the plains in shades of orange and pink. Mara set up a small camp near the ravine, giving the child a simple meal from their supplies. As they rested, she realized something important. Every trial they had faced, storm, mist, canyon, creatures, bridge, had been overcome not just by strength but by thinking, adapting, and courage. Jace sat quietly, eyes on the horizon. He knew more challenges awaited, but humans thrived on challenges. They learned, adapted, and overcame. Mara understood now what he meant. Humans were unique. They didn't just survive, they made survival possible, even in the harshest conditions. Night fell and the stars began to twinkle in the clear sky. Mara cuddled her child close, feeling warmth and hope for the first time in days. Jace checked the hoverbike once more, then joined them by the fire. The frontier was harsh, full of dangers, but tonight they had conquered it. And tomorrow they would keep moving. The morning sun burned through the thin clouds as Jace guided the hoverbike across the open plains. Mara held the child tightly, her eyes scanning the horizon. After the trials of the canyon and the bridge, she felt a cautious confidence, but the frontier had a way of reminding travelers that peace was fragile. "We're getting close," Jace said, his voice steady, eyes sharp. "The safe colony is just beyond that ridge. We should reach it by nightfall if nothing goes wrong." Mara nodded, grateful but wary. "I hope we make it. I can't imagine losing him now." She glanced at her child, who was asleep, small fingers curled against his cheek. Every mile they traveled, Mara felt both fear and hope in equal measure. Jace's eyes scanned the plains ahead. The terrain was deceptively smooth, but the frontier rarely stayed calm for long. Rocks jutted from the ground, remnants of old volcanic activity, and the occasional skeletal remains of long-dead creatures served as a grim reminder that danger was always near. As they crested a small rise, Mara froze. Ahead, a group of figures emerged, scrap metal armor glinting in the sunlight, hoverbikes lined in formation. Mara's stomach churned. "Who are they?" she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Jace's eyes narrowed. "Scavengers, mercenaries, they're after supplies. And from the looks of them, they'll take what they want by force." Mara's grip tightened around the child. "We can't fight them, not like this." Jace shook his head. "No, not like this, but there's always a way. Humans survive because we can think. We can outsmart them." The mercenaries spotted them immediately. One raised an arm, signaling their approach. Mara's heart raced, but Jace remained calm, assessing the situation. He had no weapon powerful enough to face the gang head-on, but humans had ingenuity. They could improvise, adapt, and survive. "Follow my lead," Jace whispered. He maneuvered the hoverbike toward a narrow ravine nearby, the walls steep and rocky. The mercenaries accelerated, their bikes kicking up dust as they gave chase. But the ravine was too tight for their larger vehicles. Jace used the terrain to his advantage, weaving between rocks with a precision that the mercenaries couldn't match. Mara clutched him tightly. "They're faster," she said. "They'll catch up." Jace shook his head. "Not if we stay smart. Watch and learn." He guided the bike toward a series of boulders that looked unstable. Using the hoverbike's momentum, he nudged one loose. It tumbled down the slope, crashing into the path behind them. The mercenaries skidded to avoid it, their formation breaking. Mara gasped. That was brilliant." Jace gave a faint smile but didn't look back. "Humans survive because we can see solutions no one else expects. They rely on force. We rely on creativity." The mercenaries regrouped, their engines roaring in frustration. Jace led them toward a small dried-up riverbed, its banks steep and uneven. Here, the hoverbike could move nimbly, but larger vehicles would struggle. He weaved back and forth, throwing off the mercenaries' aim. Mara's heart pounded, but she couldn't help noticing the way Jace anticipated every movement, every possible trap. Humans were unpredictable, and that unpredictability made them dangerous in ways that brute strength never could. Suddenly, one of the mercenaries leapt off their hoverbike, aiming a grappling hook to cut off their escape. Jace swerved sharply, narrowly avoiding the hook. He pressed a button on the bike, deploying a small, dense cloud of smoke, a leftover from his own improvised survival kit. The mercenary coughed and lost sight of them, crashing into a rock wall. Mara's mouth dropped open. You saved us." Jace didn't answer. He only focused on the path ahead, leading them toward a ridge that overlooked a narrow bridge. The bridge was unstable, a relic from an old supply route, but it was their only chance to escape. As they approached, one of the mercenaries reappeared, blocking the path. "Stop!" the figure shouted. "Hand over your supplies." Jace's mind raced. The child whimpered, sensing the tension. Mara's eyes filled with fear. But humans had a gift for thinking under pressure. He spotted a loose rock above the bridge. With careful maneuvering, he nudged it, sending it tumbling toward the mercenary. The figure leapt aside, but in the chaos, their hoverbike skidded on the bridge. Jace seized the moment, accelerating across, Mara holding the child tight. The bridge groaned but held. Behind them, the mercenaries shouted in frustration, unable to follow. Jace didn't slow until they reached solid ground on the other side. Mara exhaled in relief, tears streaming down her face. You tricked them," she gasped. "They were stronger, faster, and you still beat them." Jace gave a small nod. "Humans survive because we can think when others rely on force. We improvise, we adapt. That's why we're still here and they're not." Mara hugged the child tightly. "You saved his life, and mine, thank you." Jace's expression softened slightly. "We're not done yet. The safe colony is still ahead, and the plains aren't going to make it easy. But this was the hardest part. You did well, both of you." They pressed onward, the distant lights of the colony growing brighter with each mile. The plains were no longer empty. Strange formations of rock and sand dotted the horizon, shadows stretching long as the sun dipped lower. The journey had already tested them, but Jace knew that the final leg would challenge them even more. As night fell, they set up a small camp near a ridge. Mara fed the child from their remaining supplies, watching as he fell asleep with a small smile on his face. The relief was overwhelming, but the frontier was unforgiving. They could not afford to become complacent. Jace stood a short distance away, scanning the horizon with his hand shading his eyes. "Tomorrow, we push to the colony," he said. "It's close, but the plains here, they're unpredictable. Humans survive because we don't just rely on luck. We rely on our minds, our courage, and each other." Mara nodded slowly. She had seen it herself: the storms, the mist, the canyon, the creatures, the mercenaries. And every time, Jace had adapted, improvised, and guided them through danger. Humans survived because they could think, because they could act, and because they never gave up. She looked down at her child, tiny and trusting in her arms. "We will survive," she whispered, "because he has Jace, and because we're human." The night was quiet, except for the soft wind across the plains and the occasional distant howl of a wild creature. The stars twinkled overhead, a reminder that even in the harshest frontier, beauty and hope existed. Jace returned to the camp, sitting beside them by the small fire. "Humans aren't perfect," he said quietly. "We make mistakes, we fail, but we also solve problems no one else can. That's what makes us special." Mara nodded, feeling a sense of awe. She realized that survival wasn't just about strength or speed. It was about ingenuity, adaptability, and courage. Humans could face impossible odds and still find a way to win. The fire crackled, the child slept peacefully, and for the first time in days, Mara allowed herself to hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she knew they could face them. With Jace's guidance and their own determination, they could survive anything the frontier threw at them. And somewhere deep in the plains, the mercenaries fumed, unable to comprehend how a lone human could outthink and outmaneuver them. That was the essence of human ingenuity, a spark that could not be extinguished. Jace leaned back, watching the stars. The journey wasn't over, but humans had a way of turning even the direst situations into opportunities for survival. And for Mara and her child, that human spark was the difference between life and death. The first light of dawn stretched across the plains, pale and calm. Mara stirred beside the hoverbike, still clutching her child. Last night had been quiet, but the memory of the mercenaries, chase, and the dangers of the canyon and the bridge lingered in her mind. Each trial had tested their courage, endurance, and ingenuity. Each trial had shown her that survival in the frontier was never guaranteed, but humans had a way of turning the impossible into possible. Jace was already awake, scanning the horizon as he always did. His eyes were sharp, taking in every shadow and ridge. He adjusted the hoverbike's fuel cells and checked the harness securing the child. Routine, careful. Human survival required attention to every detail. "We're close," he said, his voice calm. "I can see the colony just over the next ridge." Mara rose, careful not to wake the child, and followed him. Her heart pounded. They had made it through storms, chemical mist, treacherous canyon paths, predatory creatures, and mercenaries. The safe colony was now within reach, but the frontier had one last trial in store. As they crested the ridge, they saw it. The colony was under attack. Alien drones, strange in shape and color, hovered above the settlement, scanning for life. The colony's automated defenses were damaged, likely from the same storm that had crippled New Eden's dispensers. Smoke rose from some of the outer buildings and the people inside were running for cover. Mara froze. We can't get through there," she whispered, panic creeping in. Jace's jaw tightened. "We have to. The child's life, your life, and the lives of everyone in that colony depend on it. Humans survive because we act when others hesitate, and we solve problems no one else can." He guided the hoverbike down the slope, toward the edge of the colony. Mara's heart raced with every jolt of the vehicle. The child stirred, sensing the tension, and whimpered softly. Jace glanced back at them. "Hold him tight. Keep calm. Humans survive because fear doesn't control them." The alien drones detected movement immediately. Bright sensors locked on the hoverbike. One launched a pulse, sending waves of energy toward them. Jace twisted the bike, narrowly avoiding the blast. The energy hit the ground, kicking up dirt and sparks. Mara's eyes widened. "They'll destroy us." Jace didn't flinch. He had studied human patterns and weaknesses in the galaxy, and he knew that creativity often overcame force. He maneuvered behind a pile of debris, letting the energy pulse pass harmlessly. Then he activated a small device tucked into the hoverbike's frame, a makeshift jammer. The device sent a pulse that interfered with the drone's sensors, causing them to hover erratically. Mara gasped. You stopped them." Jace nodded briefly. "Humans survive because we can think in ways no one else does. Strength isn't always in weapons, it's in ingenuity." With the drones temporarily confused, Jace led them into the colony. Mara's heart pounded as they passed terrified settlers running for cover. She held her child close, whispering reassurance, but the drones were relentless. Another launched a probe, scanning the area for movement. Jace spotted it just in time. Using the colony's ruined walls for cover, he guided them through narrow alleyways, each turn calculated to throw off the alien sensors. Finally, they reached the center of the colony, a small plaza where a group of settlers had gathered. Jace cut the hoverbike's engine and jumped off, helping Mara secure the child. She looked around at the faces of the people, relief, fear, and admiration mixed together. One of the colony leaders, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, ran toward them. "Who are you?" she demanded. "How did you get through the drones?" Jace's hat shadowed his face. "Humans survive because we adapt. I improvised. I used what I had to turn a deadly situation into a chance to survive. You can do the same." The leader's eyes widened. "But the drones, they're stronger, faster, and smarter than us." Jace shook his head. "They're predictable. Machines follow rules. Aliens follow instinct. Humans were unpredictable. That's our strength." Mara's heart swelled with pride. She realized it wasn't just Jace, she had survived too. Every decision, every step, every act of courage and quick thinking had brought them here. Humanity didn't just endure, it overcame. Suddenly, one of the drones recalibrated and advanced toward them. Jace grabbed a metal rod from the plaza's debris and swung it, hitting the drone's sensor. Sparks flew, and the drone crashed to the ground. The settlers gasped. "Humans don't give up," Jace said quietly. "We don't panic, we think, we act, and we survive." The other drones hesitated, scanning the plaza. Jace motioned for the settlers to gather behind walls. Using makeshift barricades and debris, he created a defensive path, guiding the settlers while the hoverbike's jammer continued to confuse the drones. Mara watched in awe as he orchestrated the defense. Every movement, every improvisation, was proof of what humans could do when faced with impossible odds. The drones, powerful as they were, couldn't match the creativity and courage of people fighting for life. Hours passed. The settlers, under Jace's guidance, repaired automated defenses and learned how to hide, evade, and even disable drones. Mara helped where she could, feeding instructions to frightened families, holding children close, and offering calm reassurance. By nightfall, the drones had retreated. The colony was battered but alive. The settlers gathered in the plaza, their faces filled with awe and gratitude. Mara held her child, tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked at Jace. You saved us all," she whispered. Jace shook his head. "I didn't do it alone. Humans survive because we work together, because we think, because we never give up. That's what makes us special." The colony leader stepped forward. "We've never seen anything like this. Humans, you are remarkable. Not just for your strength, but for your courage and ingenuity." Jace tipped his hat, his expression calm. "Humans survive because we can act when others hesitate, because we can see solutions no one else does. That's why we endure." Mara realized the truth in his words. Across the galaxy, there were dangers that machines, aliens, and nature itself could create. But humans had something unique, the ability to improvise, to protect life, to act with courage and intelligence in moments of despair. The colony began repairing its systems, guided by Jace and the settlers' renewed determination. Mara fed her child, smiling through tears. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope fully. They had survived storms, creatures, mercenaries, and drones. They had reached safety, and she understood that humanity's strength wasn't just in physical survival, it was in the mind, in the spirit, in the refusal to give up. As the stars glimmered above the colony, Jace looked out across the plains. The horizon was calm, but he knew the universe was unpredictable. Still, humans had a spark that could not be extinguished, a spark of ingenuity, courage, and resilience. Mara sat beside him, holding her child close. Do you think humanity can survive anything?" she asked softly. Jace smiled faintly. "Not everything, but more than anyone else believes, because humans, we don't just endure, we overcome, we adapt, and we fight when it matters most." The settlers gathered around a small fire, sharing stories of survival and hope. Mara listened, knowing that their journey was part of something larger, a story of human courage that would inspire others. That night, she looked down at her child sleeping peacefully in her arms. The trials of the frontier had tested them, but they had triumphed. And for Mara, for Jace, for every human facing impossible odds, that triumph was proof of what made them special. Humans could endure storms, outsmart predators, survive attacks, and defend life. They could create solutions where others saw only danger. They could act with courage when others froze in fear. In the quiet of the plains, Mara whispered a promise to her child. "You are human," she said softly. "And that means you can survive, you can endure, and you can change the world." Jace watched the horizon, quiet but content. The frontier would continue to test them, but humanity had a way of turning trials into triumphs. And that spark, improvisation, courage, ingenuity, would never fade. As the colony slept under the protective glow of the repaired defenses, the story of survival spread quietly among the settlers. The tale of a wandering cowboy, a desperate mother, and a small child became legend. Humans had triumphed, not because of brute strength, but because of the mind, the heart, and the unbreakable will to survive. And somewhere in the galaxy, that spark of humanity continued to shine, ready to face whatever challenges awaited next.